Have you ever wondered if love could survive the weight of family judgment, poverty, and even betrayal? Today, I'll share a powerful story of a woman who chose love over wealth and discovered a truth that would change her life forever. I've been told that life can be measured in turning points. Some people call them milestones, others call them crossroads, but to me, it always felt like standing on a cliff, wind rushing past your face, knowing that whichever way you step, there's no going back. For me, that turning point came on a quiet evening in my hometown, a place that looked ordinary to anyone driving through but held the weight of every choice I had ever made. I grew up in a family that believed in appearances. My parents weren't cruel, but they were practical in a way that left little room for daydreams. My mother would say, "Emma, remember, security is love. Without stability, even love can turn sour." My father, quieter but firm, echoed her warnings. He believed that wealth was the glue that kept marriages together, that money could soften arguments and patch up differences before they broke into cracks.
And I,
I was their contradiction. I was the girl who walked home from school with her head tilted toward the sunset, who believed laughter could fill an empty room more than expensive furniture ever could. Friends admired my optimism, my insistence that kindness mattered more than status. But admiration is easy when you're young, when futures are painted like open skies and no one has yet asked you to prove the weight of your convictions. That proof came in the form of Daniel. It was late spring when I first noticed him. My best friend, Clara, had dragged me to a wedding reception in town. I remember the room was filled with noise, laughter, glasses clinking, music competing with voices. I felt out of place, tugging at the hem of a dress that suddenly seemed too bright, too noticeable. That's when I saw him. Daniel stood near the edge of the room, away from the laughter and chatter, as though he was there but not of it. His clothes were plain, his shoes worn at the edges, his posture unassuming. He wasn't the type of man who tried to draw eyes to himself. If anything, he seemed almost determined to blend into the wallpaper. But when he smiled, briefly, softly, at something someone said near him, I noticed. And once I noticed, I couldn't stop. We didn't speak that night. Not more than a polite nod when I passed him near the refreshment table. But something about the way he carried himself lingered in my mind. While others shouted for attention with loud jokes and sharp pursuits, Daniel seemed content to exist quietly, without needing the world's approval. In the weeks that followed, our paths crossed again, as though fate had decided I needed another look at him. At the local market, he had his arms full of groceries. At the library, scanning through shelves as though searching for something only he could define. Once, I saw him volunteering at a children's charity event, his hands clumsy as he tried to assemble a stack of folding chairs, but his laughter was genuine when a group of kids teased him for taking too long. I told myself it was a coincidence, but my heart knew better. And each time, his smile was the same, warm, gentle, unforced. I didn't know much about him then, except for the whispers. Whispers have a way of floating in small towns like leaves on water, and Daniel was no exception.
people said he was poor.
That his job was unremarkable, that he lived in a modest rental without family money to fall back on. Some pitied him, others mocked him quietly. The women my mother associated with used to shake their heads and say, "A man like that can't give a girl much of a life." It should have discouraged me. Instead, it only deepened my curiosity. What made a man who had so little carry himself with such quiet dignity? The first time Daniel spoke to me properly was on a Sunday afternoon in the park near Main Street. I was sitting on a bench with a book when he walked by, hesitated, then doubled back. His voice was soft, careful, as though afraid to disturb me. "Good book?" he asked. I looked up, startled.
Yes.
"At least, I think so. It's one of those slow ones that make you work for it." He smiled, settling a safe distance away on the bench. "Those are the best kind. They don't give themselves away too easily." And that was how it began. Not with grand declarations or dramatic encounters, but with quiet, unassuming conversations about books, about the weather, about the odd quirks of people in town. With each meeting, his words grew a little bolder, though always tinged with humility. One day, he said something that etched itself into my heart. "I don't have much to give you," he admitted, looking down at his calloused hands. "But I can promise you honesty, loyalty, and a love that won't fade." There are moments in life when the world goes still, when every noise fades, and you feel the ground shift beneath your feet. That was one of them. His words weren't polished. They weren't the kind of phrases women dreamed of hearing in fairy tales. But they were real. And that reality, raw and unadorned, struck deeper than any practiced charm ever could.
Of course, my parents didn't see it that way.
When I told them about Daniel, their reactions were almost predictable. My mother's eyes widened, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Emma, how can you even think about this? He has no stability, no future to offer you. Marriage isn't just about love, it's about building a life together. A man like him can't give you the life you deserve." My father was quieter, but his disappointment cut deeper. "My dear, love is a beautiful thing, but it won't keep the lights on. It won't pay the bills or secure your future. You need to think carefully. You have choices, Emma. Don't throw them away." I listened. I always listened. But for the first time, I chose not to obey. I tried to explain it to them. "I don't want a life filled with riches, but empty of love. I want someone who will stand by me in every storm." That's Daniel. They exchanged a glance, the kind of glance parents share when they believe their child is making a mistake they can't stop. Reluctantly, they gave their blessing, though it came wrapped in disappointment. My mother cried quietly that night, thinking I didn't hear. My father avoided my eyes for days. But I couldn't let their fears change my heart. When Daniel and I stood at the altar on our wedding day, whispers filled the church. Some guests murmured that I was throwing my life away. Others shook their heads in pity, certain that I would regret my decision. But as I walked down the aisle, my eyes fixed on his, I felt no fear, no doubt. His smile was enough. We didn't have a grand reception. There were no chandeliers, no endless courses of food, no honeymoon in Paris. Instead, we celebrated with homemade dishes and laughter in the backyard of Clara's house. Daniel held my hand the entire time, as if to reassure me and maybe himself that we had everything we needed. And in that moment, I believed it. Our married life began humbly. We moved into a small, rented flat with secondhand furniture and creaky floors. I cooked simple meals, often stretching ingredients to last longer than they should have. Daniel worked long hours at a modest job, coming home with weary shoulders and tired eyes, but never without a smile for me. Neighbors whispered, relatives mocked, strangers pitied. She could have had everything, they said. But she chose nothing. I heard it all. And though their words sometimes pierced my heart, I never let them reach Daniel. I carried the weight silently, reminding myself that the world didn't need to understand. Love isn't a currency to be measured by outsiders. At night, as we sat on the worn couch sharing tea, or lay side by side in the cold with blankets piled high, Daniel would reach for my hand and whisper, "I'm glad you chose me." And every time, I would answer, "I'd choose you again." Because I meant it. Every word. But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined, was that Daniel carried secrets of his own. Secrets that would test the very foundation of everything we had built. Secrets that would change my life forever. When you first fall in love, the world has a way of softening around the edges. Bills look less intimidating, the future feels like an adventure, and even the smallest acts, cooking dinner together, folding laundry, sharing a cup of tea before bed, feel like treasures you can hold in your hands. That was how it was for me and Daniel in the beginning. Our apartment was small, tucked above a laundromat that rattled with noise every Thursday when the machines churned all day. The wallpaper peeled in places, and the pipes groaned whenever you turned on the hot water. But to me, it was a castle. We were newly married, starting from scratch, and I believed wholeheartedly that our love could weather anything. Every evening, when Daniel returned home from work, he greeted me with the same smile that had first drawn me in. His shirt would be wrinkled, his hands tired, sometimes streaked with grease or ink, depending on what he'd been doing that day. But no matter how worn down he looked, he always kissed me like he was grateful to come home to me. And for a time, that was enough. But reality doesn't stay hidden for long. The first sign of strain came in the form of money, or rather, the lack of it. Daniel's job was steady but modest. It covered rent, groceries, and the basics, but there was never enough left over. Whenever the car needed repairs, or I had to visit the doctor, we had to shuffle numbers on paper, pushing bills into the next month, hoping nothing else would go wrong. I found myself working part-time jobs, babysitting for neighbors, tutoring high school kids in English, anything to bring in a little extra. I didn't mind at first. It felt like teamwork, like us against the world. But the whispers started again, louder than before. "She left comfort for this?" an aunt said at one Sunday dinner. "Imagine living paycheck to paycheck when she could have had security," another relative muttered. My mother never said it outright, but I could see it in her eyes every time she visited our cramped apartment. She looked at the peeling paint, the secondhand furniture, the worn rug under our feet, and her lips tightened. She'd smile politely, of course, but her silence was heavier than words. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner at my parents' house, she pulled me aside. "Emma, I know you love him," she said softly. "But love doesn't put food on the table. Don't let your heart blind you to reality." I wanted to argue, to defend Daniel the way I always had, but her words hit a nerve I didn't want to acknowledge. Because even though I loved Daniel fiercely, even though I believed in our bond, cracks were appearing beneath the surface, cracks I couldn't patch with optimism alone. The second sign came in Daniel himself. At first, he was everything I admired: honest, kind, steady. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something changed. He grew quieter at dinner, distracted, as though his mind was elsewhere. I'd ask about his day, and he'd smile, assure me it was fine, then steer the conversation back to me. He'd leave early in the mornings, sometimes before sunrise, claiming he had extra shifts. At night, he came home later than usual, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. When I pressed him, he brushed it off. "Just work," he said. "Don't worry, I've got it handled." But the more he tried to soothe me, the more unsettled I became. Because I could feel it, something he wasn't telling me. Something was building like a storm we couldn't escape. The third sign came with the letters. One afternoon, as I sorted through our small stack of mail, I noticed an envelope addressed to Daniel from a company I didn't recognize. When I handed it to him that evening, he slipped it into his bag without opening it. "Just junk," he said too quickly. I didn't push, not then. But once you notice a lie, even a small one, it doesn't leave you. It plants itself in your mind, growing roots until it colors everything you see. Nights grew colder, not because of the weather, but because of the distance between us. We still laughed sometimes, still shared quiet moments, but I felt him slipping away in pieces I couldn't hold on to. I wanted to believe it was stress, that he was simply carrying burdens he didn't want to place on me. But another part of me, the part shaped by my parents' warnings, feared it was more. The turning point came one Friday evening when I decided to surprise him. He'd mentioned working late, so I packed a small dinner, sandwiches, an apple pie I'd baked, a thermos of coffee, and walked to his workplace. It was a modest office near the industrial side of town, nothing glamorous, but I figured a surprise visit would lift his spirits. When I arrived, the building was dark. The door was locked. I stood there in the chilly air, holding the basket, confusion flooding me.
I checked the time.
8 o'clock. He should have been inside. Panic bubbled in my chest as I walked back home, my mind racing with possibilities. Had he quit his job? Was he hiding something bigger? When he finally came through the door at 9, his smile faltered when he saw me waiting, the untouched basket on the table. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He hesitated, just long enough to confirm my fears. "Work ran late," he said finally. "No, it didn't," I shot back. I went there. The office was dark. No one was there. His face paled.
For a long moment, he said nothing.
Then, quietly, almost brokenly, he whispered, "Emma, please not tonight." But it was too late. The truth was clawing its way into the open, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. Over the next few days, the tension thickened. I tried to confront him again, but he avoided the questions, retreating behind silence and tired smiles. It was as though he was carrying a weight too heavy to share, but by keeping it hidden, he was placing that weight between us instead of on his own shoulders.
And
I started to wonder if my parents had been right. At night, lying beside him in the darkness, I stared at the ceiling and replayed every warning I'd ever heard. That love alone wasn't enough. That stability mattered. That a man's character was revealed not in his promises, but in how he handled responsibility. I loved Daniel. I still do, even now, remembering those nights. But love mixed with doubt is like fire in a dry field. It spreads fast, consuming everything in its path. And deep down, I knew the secret he was keeping would either shatter us, or prove once and for all that my choice to stand by him was worth everything I had risked. Because the whispers weren't just whispers anymore. They were becoming truths I couldn't ignore. And soon, the truth Daniel had been hiding would change our lives forever. I've always believed that silence in a marriage is more dangerous than anger. Anger at least has a voice. It shouts, it cries, it demands to be heard. Silence, though, creeps in like fog. It smothers. It fills the space between two people until even the simplest conversations feel forced. That was where Daniel and I found ourselves after that night, when I discovered his workplace was dark and locked. He didn't explain. Not really. He gave me half smiles and empty reassurances, as though words could patch the holes widening in our trust. I wanted to push, to demand the truth, but every time I tried, his expression stopped me cold. There was a heaviness in his eyes I didn't recognize, something deeper than simple deceit. But still, he was hiding something. And the not knowing was killing me. Our life carried on in the way life always does. The bills still arrived in the mail, neighbors still waved as they walked past our building, and my mother still called every Sunday with a mixture of concern and barely concealed disapproval. From the outside, we were just another young couple figuring things out. But behind closed doors, I felt like I was living in a house with walls that shifted when I wasn't looking, like the foundation itself was unstable. One morning, over burnt toast and weak coffee, I finally broke. "Daniel," I said quietly, "I can't keep pretending. Something's wrong and you're not telling me. I know you think you're protecting me, but you're not. You're pushing me away." His fork stilled on his plate. For a long moment, he didn't meet my eyes. When he finally did, there was an ache there that nearly made me forget my anger. "I'm trying," he whispered. "Please trust that I'm trying." Trying at what? I wanted to scream. Trying to keep us afloat? Trying to keep a roof over our heads? Or trying to keep a secret buried where I couldn't reach it? But I bit my tongue. Because even though I was angry, even though the doubt was eating me alive, I loved him. And love, at least for me, had always meant patience. So I waited. The weeks that followed blurred together. He worked more late nights, early mornings, entire weekends swallowed by vague obligations. I saw less and less of him, and when he was home, he was distracted, like his mind was elsewhere. I tried to fill the silence with small acts of care. I cooked his favorite meals, left notes in his lunch bag, and pressed my hand to his when we passed each other in the kitchen. Sometimes, just for a flicker of a moment, I saw the man I had married, the one who made me believe in us. But the flickers weren't enough anymore. The turning point came on a stormy Saturday. I'd been cleaning the apartment when I stumbled across a crumpled receipt tucked in the pocket of one of Daniel's jackets. At first, I thought nothing of it. But when I smoothed it out, my heart skipped. It wasn't from the grocery store or a gas station. It was from a hotel bar across town. The date was from one of the nights he claimed to be working late. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the slip of paper until the words blurred. My mind spun with possibilities, none of them good. Was he drinking away the money we barely had? Was he meeting someone else? The storm outside cracked with thunder, rattling the windows, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. When he came home later that night, wet from the rain, I was waiting. The receipt lay on the kitchen table between us like evidence in a trial. Do you want to explain this? I asked, my voice steady though my hands trembled. For a moment, I thought he might lie. His eyes darted to the paper, then back to me. His jaw tightened. It's not what you think, he said finally. Then tell me what it is, I pressed. But instead of answering, he pulled the receipt into his pocket, as if hiding it would erase what I'd seen. Emma, please, he said, his voice breaking. Trust me. Just a little longer. The tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I can't trust shadows, Daniel. I need the truth. He didn't give it. Not that night, not the next morning, not the week after.
And slowly, something inside me began to shift. Where once I had defended him against everyone else's doubts, I now found myself defending myself against my own. The certainty I once carried like armor was cracking. I began noticing things I had ignored before. The way he avoided certain phone calls was by stepping outside to answer them. The way he sometimes flinched when I touched his arm unexpectedly, as though I'd caught him in a lie. The way he looked at me sometimes was full of guilt instead of love. The whispers in my family's voices grew louder in my head. Maybe they had been right all along. Maybe I had been foolish, blinded by the kind of love that couldn't withstand the weight of real life. Yet even as doubt gnawed at me, I couldn't bring myself to leave. Because love isn't logical. It doesn't weigh pros and cons like a ledger. Love roots itself deep, even when it's poisoned, even when it hurts to stay. And I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. The final straw came one evening in late autumn. Daniel had promised he'd be home for dinner. I cooked a full meal, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, our version of comfort food. I set the table, lit a candle, and even played the old jazz records he loved. But the hours ticked by, and he didn't come. My calls went unanswered. When the clock struck midnight, I blew out the candle, packed away the untouched food, and sat in the darkened kitchen. That was when I decided. If he wouldn't tell me the truth, I would find it myself. The next week, I followed him. I hated myself for it. But desperation makes you cross lines you never thought you would. I told him I had errands to run, then slipped out after him, staying a safe distance behind. He walked quickly, shoulders hunched, as though the weight of the world pressed down on him. He didn't go to work. He didn't go to a friend's house. He went to the same hotel bar from the receipt. Through the window, I watched him take a seat in a quiet corner, his face shadowed under the dim lights. He wasn't meeting another woman as I had feared. He wasn't drinking heavily either. He was sitting alone, staring at an envelope on the table in front of him. Every few minutes he opened it, glanced at the papers inside, then folded it back with trembling hands. I couldn't see what the papers said, but I could see his face. And what I saw broke me more than any affair ever could. He looked haunted, like a man fighting a battle he couldn't win. I left before he saw me, my heart pounding, my mind reeling. I didn't know what the papers were, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever Daniel was hiding wasn't small. It wasn't simple. It was something that had the power to unravel us completely. And I didn't know if I was strong enough to survive the truth. I used to think the scariest sound in a marriage was silence. I was wrong. The scariest sound is your own voice asking a question you're not sure you're ready to hear the answer to. And for me, that moment came on a Wednesday night, 2 weeks after I followed Daniel to the hotel bar. I couldn't carry the weight of secrets any longer. I was exhausted from building explanations in my head, from trying to protect a love that was unraveling faster than I could stitch it back together. That night, when Daniel finally walked through the door, later than usual, shoulders sagging, his tie loose, his face pale, I didn't wait for him to take off his shoes or set down his bag. "Daniel," I said, standing in the middle of our living room. "We can't keep living like this. You need to tell me what's going on. No more excuses, no more promises of later. It's tonight. Right now. I need the truth." His eyes flickered to me, then away, as if searching for a way to escape. For a moment, I thought he'd bolt. But then he sighed, ran a hand through his hair, and nodded. "You're right," he whispered. "You deserve the truth. I just don't know if you'll still want me once you know it." His words sliced through me, sharp and cold. "I married you for you, Daniel. But I can't love a stranger. Please just tell me." He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. For a long time, the only sound was his uneven breathing. Then slowly he began to talk. It wasn't another woman. It wasn't gambling. It wasn't even a double life in the way I had feared. It was debt. Not just ordinary debt. Massive, crushing, life-altering debt. Before I met him, Daniel's family had been wealthy, at least on paper. His father was a businessman who invested in risky ventures, chasing deals that promised high rewards. But when the markets turned, those ventures collapsed. The fortune that had once been Daniel's inheritance evaporated overnight, leaving behind lawsuits, unpaid loans, and creditors knocking on every door. Daniel, the eldest son, had taken it upon himself to shoulder the wreckage. "I couldn't let my mother face the humiliation," he said quietly, his hands trembling as he spoke. "She'd already lost her husband to stress, and I couldn't let her lose her dignity too. So I took it all. Every unpaid loan, every signature, every responsibility. I thought I could handle it." His voice cracked, and he looked up at me with eyes full of pain. "But Emma, it's bigger than me. It's swallowing me whole. And I didn't tell you because I wanted to protect you from this nightmare. I didn't want you to regret marrying me." The room tilted around me. My chest felt tight, like the air itself had thickened. All those late nights, the hotel bar visits, the haunted look in his eyes, it all clicked into place. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I whispered. "Because I didn't want you to see me as a failure. I didn't want you to look at me with pity, the way the rest of the world does. You believed in me when no one else did, Emma. And I couldn't stand the thought of losing that." I sat beside him, my body stiff with shock, my mind torn between empathy and anger. "You let me think," I started, my voice shaking. "You let me think there was someone else. You let me doubt everything we've built together. Do you have any idea what that's done to me?" Tears slipped down his face, silent but heavy. "I know. And I hate myself for it. I should have trusted you. But I was scared." I wanted to scream. I wanted to hold him. I wanted to both curse and comfort him. But the storm of emotions inside me left me paralyzed. Debt. Not betrayal. Not infidelity. But still a secret heavy enough to break us. The days that followed blurred into a haze of half-conversations and raw emotions. Some mornings, I woke up determined to stand by him, to help him fight through this mountain of debt, no matter how long it took. Other mornings, I felt crushed beneath the weight of his choices, resentful that he had dragged me into a life I hadn't agreed to. My parents' voices echoed in my head. "Think wisely. A marriage isn't just about love, it's about building a future." Was this the future I had chosen? A future built on lies, half-truths, and unpaid debts? And yet, I couldn't erase the image of the man I had fallen in love with. The man who had promised me loyalty, honesty, and a love that would never fade. Even now, beneath the mistakes, beneath the fear, I still saw glimpses of him. One evening, after another long silence stretched between us, I finally broke. "Daniel," I said softly, "we can't go on like this. If you want me to stay, you have to let me in. All the way in. No more secrets. No more carrying this alone." He looked at me with a mixture of hope and despair. "Do you mean it? After everything, you'd still stand by me?" I swallowed hard. "I don't know what the future will look like. I don't know how we'll fix this. But if we're going to make it, it has to be together." For the first time in months, his shoulders eased. He pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. Maybe he was right. Or maybe love was never about what we deserved, it was about what we chose. And I was choosing him. At least for now. But choosing him didn't make the whispers go away. Neighbors still gave us pitying looks. Relatives still gossiped about how foolish I had been. My mother still dropped hints about how I could have married someone who could take care of you. And for the first time, those whispers cut deeper, because now I knew they weren't entirely wrong. Daniel wasn't the man I thought he was. Not because he was unworthy of love, but because he had kept too much hidden from me. And while I still loved him, love alone felt fragile in the face of the truth. The silence between us wasn't gone. It had just changed shape. No longer the silence of unspoken secrets, but the silence of two people staring at a mountain, unsure if they had the strength to climb it together. The real test came sooner than I expected. One cold December morning, a letter arrived in the mail. A thick envelope with a return address from a law firm downtown. I opened it with trembling hands, scanning the words until my vision blurred. Notice of asset seizure. Our tiny apartment, the car, even the few savings we had scraped together. Everything was at risk. When Daniel came home that evening, I handed him the letter without a word. He read it, his face tightening with each line. Finally, he looked at me with hollow eyes. Emma, I don't know if I can fix this. Something inside me broke then. Not because of the debt, not because of the fear, but because of the look in his eyes. The look of a man ready to give up. I grabbed his hand, gripping it tightly. No, I said fiercely. We are not giving up. Not now. Not ever. You don't get to collapse, Daniel. Not when I'm standing here, willing to fight with you. Tears spilled down his cheeks. For the first time, I saw not just guilt and shame, but relief. Because finally, after months of secrets, after walls of silence, after shadows that nearly destroyed us, we were on the same side of the fight. Together. And yet, even as I spoke those words, even as I promised myself that love could conquer this, a small, quiet voice inside me whispered the question I didn't want to face. How much longer could love survive when the world itself seemed determined to break us apart? When I was a girl, I thought happy endings were simple. You met someone, you fell in love, and everything else, the doubts, the storms, the trials, eventually melted away because love was enough. Now, standing in the wreckage of what Daniel and I had built, I knew love was not simple. Love was work. Love is a choice. Love was staring at the ruins of your life and saying, we'll build again. Even if we have to start with nothing. But nothing was exactly where we stood. The notice of asset seizure had stripped us bare. Within weeks, our apartment was emptied, our car repossessed, and our accounts frozen. It wasn't just numbers on paper anymore, it was real. It was every drawer we packed into cardboard boxes, every photo we wrapped in newspaper, every memory we carried down those stairs in silence. We moved into a small room above a friend's garage, the kind of place that smelled of oil and dust, with a mattress on the floor and a single lamp that flickered when it rained. It should have felt like a punishment, but oddly it felt like a beginning. This isn't forever, I told Daniel one night as we lay side by side on that thin mattress. It's just a stop along the way. He turned his head toward me, his eyes heavy with guilt. You shouldn't have to live like this. You could have had so much more. I reached for his hand. I didn't marry more, Daniel. I married you. And as long as I still have you, I haven't lost everything. For the first time in months, he smiled. Not the forced smile he gave to the world, but the small, broken one he saved just for me. But surviving wasn't just about love, it was about action. Daniel found work wherever he could, fixing cars, hauling boxes at warehouses, even cleaning offices after hours. Jobs he never thought he'd do. But he did them anyway, sweat dripping down his face, hands blistered and raw. And I worked too. I took on freelance writing, tutoring, and anything that brought in a few extra dollars. Together, we lived off instant noodles and dollar store groceries, stretching every cent like it was gold. It was exhausting, humiliating, and at times unbearable. But slowly, I realized something. The struggle was stripping away the illusions, the pride, the secrecy. What remained was us, raw, vulnerable, but united in a way we had never been before. We weren't Emma and Daniel, the couple who looked perfect at family dinners or smiled for pictures at weddings. We were Emma and Daniel, the couple who cried together in the dark, who counted coins at gas stations, who shared the last slice of bread without resentment. Somehow, that felt more real than anything we'd had before. Still, the whispers never stopped. When I visited my parents, my mother's sighs grew heavier. You don't have to suffer like this, Emma. You could come home. You could start over. And when Daniel's name surfaced at gatherings, the word failure always lingered in the air. Unspoken but loud enough to choke me. But each time, I looked at him. The man who now met my eyes without hiding, who worked until his body ached, who no longer carried his burdens in silence, and I knew leaving him would be the bigger failure. Because love wasn't about finding someone who made life easy. Love was about finding someone worth walking through fire with. And Daniel was worth the fire. Then one day something shifted. Daniel came home later than usual, his shirt stained, his hands dirty. But his eyes burned with something I hadn't seen in so long. Hope. Emma, he said breathlessly, dropping onto the mattress beside me. You remember Mr. Thompson? The mechanic I've been helping after hours. I nodded cautiously. He wants me to manage one of his shops. He says I've got a knack for the work, for the people. It's steady pay, Emma. More than I've been making all year. And, he says if I prove myself, there's a chance I could buy into the business. I stared at him, stunned. For so long, it felt like we'd been sinking with no end in sight. And suddenly here was a rope. Not a miracle, not a lottery win, but a rope. Something we could climb. Tears filled my eyes. But this time they weren't from despair. Daniel, that's amazing. I couldn't finish, so I threw my arms around him instead. He held me tightly, his body trembling. I wanted to give up so many times. But you kept me standing, Emma. You were my reason to keep fighting. I'll never forget that. And for the first time, I believed him. Months turned into a year. We worked, we saved, we rebuilt. Not in the glamorous way I once imagined, but in a real, gritty, honest way. Every small victory felt monumental. The day we paid off the first debt in full. The day we bought a second-hand car. The day we signed a lease on a tiny but warm apartment that smelled of fresh paint instead of oil. The whispers faded. My parents stopped pressing. The neighbors stopped staring. But even if they hadn't, it wouldn't have mattered. Because I had learned something in the ruins of our life. A marriage isn't tested in the sunshine, when everything is easy. It's tested in the storm, when the roof caves in, when the lights go out, when the world tells you to walk away. And against all odds, we hadn't walked away. One evening, as we sat in our new apartment eating dinner on mismatched chairs, I looked across the table at Daniel. His hands were still rough, his face a little older, his eyes carrying scars I knew would never fully fade. But he was here. He was mine. And somehow that was enough. You know, I said, smiling softly, if you'd told me at the start that this is where we'd end up, I probably would have run. He chuckled. Yeah, I would have run too. We laughed, and for a moment, the weight of the past years lifted. Do you regret it? I asked quietly, the question I had been too afraid to ask until now. Do you regret us? His laughter faded, and he leaned across the table, taking my hand. Emma, he said firmly, you are the only thing I don't regret. Losing money, losing pride, losing everything else, I can live with that. But losing you? That would have destroyed me. Tears blurred my vision, but this time they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of love, messy, imperfect, hard-won love. I squeezed his hand and whispered, then let's promise each other something. No more secrets. No more silence. Whatever storm comes next, we face it together. His grip tightened. Together. And in that moment, I finally understood what a happy ending really was. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't perfection. It wasn't the absence of hardship. It was this. Two people, scarred but unbroken, choosing each other again and again, even when the world told them not to. Our story wasn't the fairy tale I once dreamed of. It was harder, messier, and far more painful. But it was real. And it was ours. And somehow that made it beautiful.